Hey everybody, it's Julian here, and today I've got a really cool tutorial on how to make some realistic sort of text that looks like it's floating in water. And then what we're also going to do is mask out that text, so you can have a wave or a person moving across the scene or anything like that, and then it actually disappears as it moves across. So I'll just show you a little example here. I've got some text. The text actually has some ripple to it. It's sort of opaque. It looks like it's actually sitting in the water. And then I've got a wave coming through here, and the wave's actually making the text disappear as it goes past it. So it's a really cool effect. It's actually super easy to do, but it just really looks awesome for how much effort it takes to do. So that's what I'm going to be teaching you how to do today. Just make sure if like whatever footage you're using for this effect is still, you don't want the camera to move at all, otherwise I'll sort of give away the effect a bit. But yeah, you could use this in any sort of scenario at all, just anything to do with water that has some sort of flat area for you to put this text on. It could even work on like a waterfall or something. It will work on anything really. So you don't have to have sort of like the same camera angle as me. It can just be like anything. So yeah, I'm just going to get straight into it and create a new project here. So I'm just going to go file new, put in a new project. I'm going to drag in my clip. So I'm going to just using After Effects for the tutorial, nothing else. I'm just going to drag in my clip into my timeline. So I have a clip here, just the one you just saw. It's pretty straightforward. I'm just going to cut out the start a little bit, and I will also cut out the end because my tripod was shaking a little bit at the start. So let's just ignore that. Another thing you want to do is, if you want to give it a bit more of a cinematic effect, or if your footage was a bit too short or a bit too long, what we can do is actually stretch out the time and sort of slow it down or speed it up. Just make sure if you want to slow it down, you had to have been shooting at 60 frames or 50 frames, so that you can actually have the frames to be able to slow it down to like a 30 frame a second. If you're shooting in 30 frames, it's going to look a bit choppy if you slow it down. But what we can do is just go to layer, time, and then time stretch, and then we can sort of change it to whatever duration we want. So I might just change it to 8 seconds, so it's just a little bit less than double the sort of time. And then I'm just going to go up to composition settings, and then change the duration of my timeline to 8 seconds also, so they both match. And I'm just going to hit OK. So now I've got my new footage here, and it's just slowed down a little bit. And what we can do now is start putting in our text. So I'm just going to right click on my timeline here, just go to new, and then text, and then we're just adding text. So I guess I'll just say my name, Julian, like this. And then that's pretty straightforward. Just choose whatever text, whatever font looks good. This probably would look better with like a bolder font so you can see it clearly. If you're using like a super detailed font or something really thin, you might not be able to see it too well. So just make sure that you can easily see the font. I'm also doing mine in white because it's going to sort of give this overlaid effect on the water. Though if your scene is sort of really bright or whatever, you can change the text whatever color you want. But yeah, just whatever works for your scene. But in general, the white should work pretty well. So now that I've got our text, we're just going to go to our Effects and Presets panel. If you don't have that, you just go up to Window and then Effects and Presets. And what we need to do is just type in the word Transform, and then we're looking for the effect underneath Distort. So what we're going to do is just drag that onto our text layer. The reason why we're adding this is because it has the skewing sort of effects, as well as the rotation and the other things. So we can actually make the text look like it's slanted and sort of sitting on the floor plane, like it's sitting on the water. If you have a different angle, you'll be able to skew it to whatever angle you want. So I'm just going to zoom in a little bit here, and then what we can do is just add a bit of skew. And you can see as I do this, it just makes it sort of skewed. So yeah, obviously that doesn't match our water though, so I can skew that. And then if I go down here to skew axis, I can sort of click and drag on this wheel and spin that around, and you can see it starts to actually change the axis we're skewing it on. So if I drag it a little bit to the right here, what I'm trying to do is just match a sort of angle that looks like it's sitting on the water. So that basically looks like it, maybe a little bit more, something like that. I think that looks good there, but it's sort of rotated at a bit of an odd angle. So what I can do is also just go to the rotation just underneath the skew axis, and then just rotate it a little bit. So it's just really nice and easy, those transformation controls, because it's just got all those things in the same settings. And then if the angle doesn't quite match, you can basically just change the skew and then change the skew axis and stuff, and just sort of try to use those options in tandem with each other, and to sort of get it as accurate as you can. You don't have to get it perfect, but you can just sort of work with it and just sort of see how best you can get it. So it might take a little bit of sort of fiddling around, but I think that looks pretty good there, like that. It says Julian, cool. So now we've got that, what we need to do is actually add our ripple. So I'm just going to type in literally ripple, and then there's an effect called ripple under Distort, and we can just click and drag that onto our text layer as well. So for the ripple, what we're trying to do is basically mimic the water rippling on our text. So this will be a little bit different for everybody. If you have like a stream, you're going to have to change the ripple to match that. Obviously, I have an ocean here with some waves, so it's sort of straightforward. But if the water's really still, or maybe for some reason you have like really still water and then you have like a droplet of water and it makes like that sort of circle ring effect expand out, you're going to have to change it to whatever you like. So it's really, really easy to change it to whatever sort of setting you have though, because in the ripple settings, there's a setting here called center of ripple. And what we can do is just click on the little sort of circle crosshair looking thing. And then what we can do is basically change wherever the center of the ripple is. So because I've got an ocean, I'm going to do it right up here in the top right hand corner. So if you can imagine like a giant circle getting drawn out from around that, you could see that we'll basically have a big semicircle coming out over our text from this way, which matches the angle that the waves are coming from. But you basically just want that center of ripple to be the source of the water. So whatever way the water's flowing, make sure it's coming from that center point. And then what we can do is just turn up the radius a whole bunch, and you can see once I've turned up the radius to fully cover my text has the rippling effect. And then if I just sort of scrub through my timeline, you can see it's got this really crazy ripple, which looks pretty cool. So yeah, what we can do is just sort of edit that now to sort of make it mimic the ocean and make it look a bit more realistic. So what I can do is change the wave speed. So I'm just going to quickly do a preview play here. So I think that speed's a little bit too fast, so it doesn't look quite realistic. So what I'm going to do is just type in maybe around 0.7 instead of 1. I think that should be a bit better. I can also change the width and the height. So all I'm doing now is basically looking at my scene, seeing the size of the waves and the ripples and the actual water in my scene, and just trying to mimic that and sort of copy it onto my text. So I think the width of the waves is a little bit smaller than that. So let's just turn that down a little bit, maybe even less than that. Something like that will probably be good, around 12. And then I'm obviously going to turn down the height a bit, because I just want to be sort of subtle. I don't want to be too intense. So maybe around 13 for the width and around 5 for the height. So if I quickly just play that, I can basically get a preview of what that looks like. I think it looks pretty good right there actually. I'm liking how that's looking, but you could sort of change this. Another thing you can also do is add 2 ripples on top of each other. So if I want that for just sort of like my small little ripples, what I can do is drag on another ripple, and then it sounds weird. Otherwise, if you don't want to drag it on, you can sort of just press Ctrl+C and copy the settings from that ripple, and then basically paste it onto this ripple here just by pressing Ctrl+V on the new ripple. So I'm saying ripple way too much, but yeah, so what we have is basically 2 of the exact same ripple now. And what I can do is just say change the speeds and the settings of this to make sort of a bigger one that makes it look like the whole text is sort of moving a bit more. So I'll try and sort of explain that now. So what we're going to do is I'll just turn the height way up just so we can get a better idea of what we're looking at. And I'll change the width so the width is really, really big. So it basically almost covers our whole text, something like this. So our whole text is sort of moving from side to side. And then I'll make the speed a bit slower, so maybe around 0.3. And then I'll obviously turn the height way down. So what I want to do is just have a really, really subtle version of this effect. So maybe around 3 or 5. Let's see what 6 looks like. And then if I go to the start of my timeline, hit play, you can see my whole text has this little bit of a jiggle now. So if I just turn off that ripple on and off, you can see it just sort of skews my text a little bit and just makes it look a little bit more realistic, because obviously this ocean here isn't perfectly flat. There's waves, so certain parts of the text will be a bit more sort of skewed and warped than other parts. But yeah, you can play around with all those ripples and distorts and basically do whatever looks realistic and whatever looks good for you. But I'm happy with that. So now we've done that, what we need to do is pre-compose our text, because what we need to do next after this is add our mask. But because we added those transform effects like the skew, if I just quickly turn off that transform, the mask is actually going to ignore that transform and it's going to apply it to this normal sort of front-facing text. So what we need to do is basically make it into a composition so it sort of ignores all those settings, and then we can just apply a mask like normal. It's super, super easy. You don't really have to do anything. So all we have to do is just right-click on our layer here, just hit pre-compose, and then I can just call this sort of water text like that. Hit enter, and then we're done. So all that did was, if we double click on water text, we go into a different composition to edit that, and then you can just click back on your original composition and it's not a problem. So another thing we need to do before we do anything else is sort of make this text look like it's actually sort of on the water. It's a little bit opaque and it looks like that effect that I showed you at the start. So it's really, really easy to achieve that effect. All we need to do is change the blend mode and the opacity. So if I just click on my layer here, I'm just going to click the little drop down arrow. I'll click it again to go into transform, and then we have opacity. So I'm going to drag down the opacity a little bit, maybe around 80% should look good. And then we can go up to the mode here where it says normal. If you can't see where it says the blend mode here, just click on this little button here that says toggle switches modes, and then that sort of toggles on and off that little drop down bar. And then what we want to do is just change that from normal to classic color dodge, and then we can turn down the opacity a little bit more, and you can see this is how we get that really cool sort of holographic opaque effect. I don't really know what to call it, but what you can do is basically just change the opacity for whatever looks good. You know, if your water is darker or brighter, you're just going to have to change it to what suits your scene and what sort of looks realistic. So maybe around 40% for me, I think that looks pretty good. And you can see if we play it now, it looks really nice. It actually looks like it's sitting on our scene, except when that big wave comes by, obviously that's where we start to break the effect. And in your scene, what I suggest, like a really, really easy way to achieve this effect is just point the camera at like water, like go to the beach, get a tripod, point the camera at the water, and then walk past the tripod. And then you can just have the text on the water, and then when your legs cross in front of the sort of the composition, you can mask out your legs, so then the text disappears. Otherwise, you can do it with like a wave or something like this. Okay, so to get back into the tutorial, all we need to do now is add a mask, and this is really easy as well. So just make sure you clicked on your text layer, and then what we need to do is just go to our pen tool. So up the top little bar here, we have our pen tool. Otherwise, you can just hit G on your keyboard, and that also goes to the pen tool. And what we need to do is basically create a little rectangle that our text is going to be inside of, and then we can move the edges of that rectangle for the mask. So I'm just going to start clicking on the screen and creating a mask, and what I'm going to do is basically sort of mimic the edge of this wave here. So because it's a wave, what we're going to do is feather out this mask a lot, so it doesn't need to be perfect at all. I can basically make it pretty dodgy. So yeah, if it's something more precise, if it's like an actual hard-edged object or something like that's like actually moving in front of the text, you're gonna have to do a bit more of an accurate job on this masking. But for me, for a wave, or any sort of wave like this, it's pretty straightforward. You can get away with a really bad mask. So like that, we have our mask done, and just make sure you sort of complete the loop. So we're basically just making a big box around our text, and then you can see the top edge of my box here is up against the side of that wave. Now what we want to do is start keyframing this. So I'm just going to go to the drop downs of this layer again, and then you can see we have a new thing popped up here called masks. I can just click on that and then open up the first mask here, which is the mask we just drew. And then we have this first option here that says mask path. And I can just click on the little stopwatch to the left of that, which just turns on my keyframing. So now anytime I edit this mask path, it's automatically going to make a keyframe. So what I'll do now is basically to scrub through my timeline to where the text starts to get sort of overlapped from this water. So maybe around here, like that, maybe a bit further back, something like that. And then what I can do is just get the anchor points of my path. Another really common error, or not an error, but just a common little thing that I used to get all the time, is when you accidentally move this whole mask and you don't know how to move just one anchor point, just make sure you clicked on the full layer. If you click on the actual mask inside the options, you'll move the entire thing. But if you click off that and just click on the layer, then you can just click and drag the individual anchor points. Super easy fix, but a lot of people have that problem. So what we can do now is just click and drag all of these little anchor points to basically just move them to where the wave is now, or whatever objects in your scene. Just make sure you're moving them, sort of updating that path. So I'm just going to move all of these down to the wave, and I'm just sort of going what looks good. Some of it might not be too sort of realistic, but I'm just sort of going whatever looks like the edge of the wave, and I think that should be fine. And if you want to add new paths, that's super easy. All you can do is just click in the center of a line, and then it'll basically make a new path. Super simple. So yeah, now I've got that. You can see if we were to change our timeline here, it actually animates that path to wherever we just made it. And just making sure we still have that stopwatch clicked on, we can just keep doing this now, and it'll just automatically animate the in-between for us. So I can just skip forward a little bit more, drag these anchor points down a little bit so they're up against the wave here. I'm just going to keep dragging these down like that, drag that down, drag that, and yeah, it's pretty straightforward. That's something really nice about animating sort of masks in After Effects. Some people think it's like super daunting and super hard, but it does most of the hard work for you. It's pretty straightforward. So then we're just going to scroll through again, drag these down. I think I cut my clip off a little bit too early, so the actual sort of video clip here ends before the text fully disappears, but that's okay. This is just an example. Just make sure it probably will look a little bit better if you actually have your text fully disappear, so the whole text is gone by the end of your video clip. So if you're doing that, basically I just scrub forward a little bit more, and then I would make it so I basically go like this. I drag down all the anchor points so my text is completely disappeared, following whatever object I have in the scene. So by the time the wave goes, it fully covers the text. But obviously I can't really do that in my scene because the video cuts out before that, but that's okay. So now we've got that. If I was to just quickly click off my mask on that layer here, and I just play that, I'll zoom in a bit. You can see that we're sort of looking okay, but you can have these really hard edges on our wave, and it looks a bit bad. It doesn't look too realistic, and there's a really simple way that we can solve this. So what I'm going to do is just go back into my mask settings here, and there's an option that says mask feather, and all we can do is just click and drag that mask feather up a little bit. You can sort of make this as much or as little as you want, so maybe around 26 pixels should work for me. Something to remember is this will sort of feather out both ways. So what you want to do is just double check and make sure that your path is still sort of accurate, because it will sort of drag it out a bit. So you can see in here, I don't like how much that is going up there, so I can just drag these anchor points forward a little bit just to make that look a bit better. So you may have to edit your path just a little bit, but what this does is basically just smoothing out that transition on the edge of the mask, and it just makes it look way better. So if I zoom in and then play that now, having done the feather, you can see that just looks really realistic and really cool, and it took 2 seconds to make. It was a really easy effect to do, and that's it. So that's the tutorial. It's really not that hard, it just sort of takes a little while to explain, but yeah, you can do this in almost anything. And another thing to remember is you don't always have to add the sort of like the rippling water effect. You can sort of take whatever you want out of this tutorial and then apply those effects separately. So you could also just put this text on like a plain wall without having the rippling effect, and then you could have, you know, like a subject or like a car or whatever move in front of the text and make it fade out and disappear. Otherwise you could get rid of the whole masking effect. Maybe you just want to have some cool looking text that's like floating on water. So yeah, you can just take whatever you want out of this tutorial and then use that in your own way. So I hope you all enjoyed. If you have any future ideas for tutorials, any videos you'd like me to cover, be sure to let me know in the comments. I'd love to hear all of your awesome opinions. So as always everybody, I hope you have an awesome day, and I hope you enjoyed the video. It's been Julian here. See ya.